I recently had one of my subscribers review one of my videos about atheism and apologetics and arguing with atheists. And this guy told me I had weak arguments. Now, this came from a Christian, not from an atheist. You can imagine an atheist would immediately attack and say, hey, you got really weak arguments. But I had a Christian brother say, hey man, your arguments against atheism are really, really weak. And here's where he went with it. He was like, to challenge science, to say that science has errors in it and it's got problems, all that kind of stuff, that's a really weak argument. Now I'm beginning to see that guy's research was really, really weak. It was not in depth. It was not thorough. And I have been investigating these types of things for, oh my goodness, 25, 35 years, casually, sometimes seriously. Like, I have been on this, and it's just nice to be affirmed at some point. So recently, as I was, combing through some things on the internet, I ran across several instances that help make the case for me that atheism that is based on science and science being factual and objective and being the truth because it cuts against the Bible and that's what makes it right, and the Bible's full of errors and all that kind of stuff, that all of that is just a house built on sand. So here's some of the things that I ran into. Number one, years ago, I ran into the reproducibility study, which actually is getting a little more traction this time. And basically, certain scientists went through and just tried to get the same results back out of experiments that other scientists had gotten. And they had terrible, terrible results. Like, I said reproducibility study. Well, why don't you go look it up and check into that and see how real and how far-reaching in scope that was. But it has come out that recently, Francesca Gino has been doctoring her data sets. And she's a professor at Harvard. Now, any institution out there has a fraud at certain times, okay? But you need to understand some of the context for this, and people even go on into explaining why. Like, once you have climbed in prominence, once you are at Harvard, the whole world is looking your direction and expecting leadership from you and breakthroughs from you. And there's intense pressure. And what if you can't perform? What if there's nothing to give? What if all of your research for the rest of your life isn't, world changing? What if it's not going to get you any prizes or acclaim? What if it's just all wrong from that point on? So there is intense pressure. How are you going to get funding? I've mentioned some of these things. And so Francesca Gino has been caught red-handed doctoring a whole lot of information. Now, what we should really think about is, I thought with the whole peer review scenario that this kind of stuff should have been caught a while back. We are taught to think that science is a solid and firm, trustworthy foundation. And one of the reasons is because we have peer review. But peer review, for it to work, has to have peers reviewing it. And it's funny that when peers start reviewing this stuff, it begins to crumble. Now, I'm not against science. I'm not against facts. I love science and facts. It always points towards truth if it is truth that has been recorded and collected. A paper by a guy named J.P. Iamaionitis or something. I'm sorry. Let me be really rude. I'm glad I did this. John P. A. Ionitis, Ioannidis, wrote a paper on why most published research findings are false. Now, why would he go out of his way to do something like this? But what he started doing was examining data sets and how statistics are altered or changed or put together, or how wild and varying they are. And here is something that I continue to share And I have even recently started sharing with academics, and man, they just don't like it. They just don't like it because it goes against everything. But they're like, I tell them, I was like, objectivity is a subjective engagement. And a lot of them don't want to think too philosophical about it because most of them are academics just taking information and running with it and not really trying to think. But I've mentioned that again, that objectivity is a subjective engagement. Like somebody has to subjectively figure out what is objective. And then I was talking to one guy about this, and in the middle of it, I was like, but I get where they're going. I get where this root is of science, of where they're trying to go. They want to get to objectivity. And so, man, I get their point. Like, if we screen and filter the information enough, we're eventually going to come to objectivity. And I kind of talked myself out of my own answer because originally I said all objectivity is still subjective. You got the perception about the objective, so that makes it subjective. But then I was like, but they're trying to get to the objective. I thought, okay. But that is a subjective longing. I figured that out today as I was contemplating through this again. I was like, it's this deep desire to be connected with truth and to see ultimate truth is still a subjective longing. Wow, it's just something really neat to think about. Well, so with this, come to find out that, science wants an error rate or a deviance rate to really show that information is important. If the error rate is, I think, under 5%, or there's a 5%, difference in what they knew or the outcome, etc., before people really start taking into account, is this worth anything? Is it worth something? And so, but then you find out that where does that 5% margin come from? And that it was actually subjectively chosen by Ronald Fisher in about 1925. I mean, somebody had to choose the first boundary, this first border of what's significant or not. And I want you to think about that. What is statistical significance? Like, so if I said there is a 100% chance that your car is going to blow up when you go out there to it, you're like, well, I'm not going to start the car. But then what if I said, well, there's a 51% chance that if you start your car, it's going to blow up on you? You're like, well, I don't think so. Would you be okay if it gets down to like 2 and 3%? No, then I want factually accurate. And the point that is being made by many who are calling these things to attention is that, hey, there's a lot of subjectivity going on in our test, and we are subjectively gathering the information. We are subjectively interpreting the information. We are subjectively screening the information. We're subjectively applying the information. And so we probably need to be a lot more careful. And you would think we were already being careful, but as you begin to dig in, you find out that is not so much the case. So I was told that I had a weak argument against science, and the point that I'm continuing to make is that scientists are the one who are doing science. Scientists are the one who are creating the data sets, etc. And if there is any kind of personal motivation, such as fame, or losing your job, or just approval as a scientist, or that you're going to lose your funding, like if there's any of those scenarios tied to it, then science can become tainted. And so if you look through that, you really understand it's not a weak argument if it is the truth. So anyhow, I just thought I'd bring some of these things to the forefront again. It is not a weak argument to say that science is conducted in a very subjective manner at certain levels, at certain places, etc. Am I against math or measuring and all that? Not at all. But I don't want to be so blinded like, well, there's no human nature to consider when you're considering science, because that would actually be a very foolish consideration or lack of consideration.